The message came at 0300 ship time, and it changed everything. Lieutenant Hana was sitting at her console on the bridge of the flagship Halasan, running through routine signal checks, when a burst of static cut through the silence. She adjusted the frequency, leaned closer, and then her blood went cold. Through the crackling noise, she could hear screaming. Not one voice, many. Men, women, children, all crying out in terror. Behind the screaming, there was the sharp hiss of plasma fire, the crash of metal being torn apart, and then a voice, deep and rasping, speaking in a language her translator could barely process. Then the signal died. Just like that. Nothing but empty static where 12,000 human lives used to be. Hana sat frozen for 3 seconds. Then she hit the emergency alert. Within 10 minutes, Admiral Yuna stood on the bridge. She was a woman of average height, with short gray hair and eyes that never seemed to blink when things went wrong. The crew called her the Glacier behind her back. Not because she was cold, because when she went quiet, something terrible was about to happen to whoever had made her quiet. She listened to the recording 3 times without saying a word. The bridge crew watched her, waiting. Captain Tejo stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was her right hand, a tall, lean man with sharp features and a mind built for war. He commanded the destroyer Baekdu, and he had been through enough battles to know when the air in a room changed. It had just changed. Eridu 7, Hana said, her voice barely steady. Frontier colony, population 12,000. Miners, engineers, families. We lost all contact 18 minutes ago. Cause? Yuna asked. Unknown. But that voice on the recording, my system flagged it as a partial match to Velkai language patterns. The name meant nothing to most of the crew. The Velkai Dominion was a rumor, a shadow from beyond the map sectors. Raiders, slavers, conquerors who had crushed dozens of smaller species across the outer rim. They had never come this close to human space before. Yuna turned to Tejo. Wake the fleet. There was no hesitation in her voice, no debate, no committee, just a decision, made in the time it took to breathe. While the 7th Fleet began to mobilize in the dark silence of deep space, the news reached the Galactic Council at Apex Citadel, a massive orbital station that served as the political heart of over 200 species. Earth's delegate, a woman named Jisoo, was pulled from her quarters at an unreasonable hour and brought to the council chamber. Jisoo was not a soldier, but she carried herself like one. She had spent 15 years navigating the endless politics of the galaxy, smiling at species that looked down on humanity, shaking hands with creatures who privately called humans the infant race. She was patient. She was precise. And underneath her calm exterior, there was a line that no one had ever been foolish enough to cross. Until now, the council chamber was enormous, a curved amphitheater filled with hundreds of alien delegates, each representing their own species. At the center stood High Arbiter Morvan, an ancient insectoid creature with a clicking voice, and a deep belief that every problem in the universe could be solved with the right trade agreement. He had led the council for over 60 years, and in that time, he had never once voted for war. The chamber screens lit up with a broadcast. It was the Velkai Dominion, their first direct contact with the Galactic Council. The transmission showed a Velkai commander, a tall reptilian figure covered in dark scales, standing in what was clearly the Eridu 7 colony hub. Behind him, human colonists knelt on the ground with their hands bound. Some were bleeding. Some were not moving at all. The commander spoke in a slow, deliberate voice. The translation rolled across the screens. We are the Velkai Dominion. We have claimed this world and its population. Our terms are simple. The human government will surrender 3 frontier systems to our control. They will deliver 50,000 tons of refined titanium to our designated coordinates. They will withdraw entirely from the Eridu sector. If these terms are not met within 10 standard days, every human on this world will be executed. This is not a request. Delegates spoke over each other, some in panic, some in calculated concern, some with barely hidden relief that it was the humans who were being targeted, and not them. Morvan raised his limbs for silence. When the noise settled, he turned to Jisoo. Delegate Jisoo, the Council urges restraint. We have dealt with aggressive powers before. The path forward is negotiation. If you offer partial compliance, perhaps one system and a reduced resource payment, we may be able to broker a— No, Jisoo said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the chamber like a blade. Morvan's antennae twitched. I beg your pardon? I said no. Jisoo stood from her seat. Her junior aide, a young woman named Sujin, sat behind her, watching everything with wide, careful eyes. There will be no partial compliance. There will be no negotiation. There will be no brokering. A delegate from the Forksea Collective leaned forward. A few thousand colonists on a backwater world are not worth provoking a— Not worth it? Jisoo repeated, and something in her voice made the Forksea delegate stop talking. She looked around the chamber slowly, meeting eyes and lenses and optical sensors of every shape. Let me ask this council a question. What is your official position on negotiating with those who murder civilians as a bargaining tool? Silence. Morvan shifted uncomfortably. The council recognizes that contextual diplomacy requires— I didn't ask about context, Jisoo said. I asked about murder. Nobody answered. Jisoo nodded slowly, as if the silence had told her everything she needed to know. Then she spoke, and her voice carried across every corner of the chamber. Earth does not negotiate with those who hold knives to the throats of children. We never have. We never will. This is not a debate. This is not a request for permission. This is a notification. Our fleet is already moving. The chamber exploded with voices, shouting, protesting, warning. Jisoo did not sit down. She did not flinch. She simply turned to Sujin and gave a small nod. Sujin's fingers moved across her datapad, transmitting the fleet deployment codes directly to Admiral Yuna. Thousands of light years away, Admiral Yuna received the confirmation. She looked at Taeho. He looked at her. Nothing needed to be said. All ships, Yuna spoke into the fleet channel, set course for Eridu 7, full speed. The 7th Fleet turned as one and jumped to light speed, and the stars became lines of white fire. The Galactic Council did not sleep that night. Not because they were worried about the colonists on Eridu 7. Most of them had already accepted those lives as lost. They were worried because the humans were doing something no species had done in over a century. They were refusing to play the game. In the hours after Jisoo's declaration, the chamber became a storm of diplomatic panic. Delegates sent urgent messages back to their homeworlds. Advisors whispered into translators. Screens flickered with data projections, threat assessments, and historical records of every species that had ever challenged a superior military force. The records were not encouraging. In almost every case, the smaller power had been crushed, absorbed, or simply erased from the galactic map. High Arbiter Morvan called an emergency session the following morning. The chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Observers crowded the upper galleries. This was no longer just a human problem. This was a test of how the galaxy worked, and everyone knew it. Morvan opened the session with his usual calm, clicking voice. The Council has reviewed the Velkai ultimatum and the human response. We are deeply concerned. The deployment of military force without Council approval is a violation of Article 7, Section 3 of the Galactic Cooperation Charter. Jisoo finished for him, standing at the human delegation's platform, with her hands folded in front of her. Sujin sat behind her, recording everything. I've read it. The article also states that military action is permitted in cases of direct territorial aggression and the immediate endangerment of a member species' civilian population. Both conditions are met. He had not expected her to know the charter better than he did. A delegate from the Tolvari Union, a species of tall, silver-skinned beings, known for their trade empires, rose to speak. Delegate Jisoo, let us set aside legality for a moment and discuss practicality. The Velkai Dominion is estimated to possess a fleet 3 times the size of your deployed force. Even if your ships reach Eridu 7, what then? You fight, you lose, and the colonists die anyway, along with your soldiers. The rational choice, Jisoo interrupted, her voice still perfectly level, according to this council, is to hand over 3 systems full of people, deliver enough titanium to build a war fleet, and reward the Velkai for killing civilians. Tell me, when does the rational choice stop being rational and start being cowardice? The Tolvari delegate stiffened. Across the chamber there was a ripple of uncomfortable movement. Nobody liked that word. Cowardice. It hung in the air like smoke. A smaller delegate, from the Reshki, a species of short fur-covered beings who had lost 2 colony worlds to raiders decades ago, spoke up with a trembling voice. The Tolvari are right about the numbers. We lost our people because we could not fight. We had no choice. But you have a choice. And you are choosing to throw your people into a fire. Jisoo looked at the Reshki delegate for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer, but no less firm. We are not throwing anyone into a fire. We are walking into it. There is a difference, and the difference is that we are not leaving our people behind. The session continued for hours. Delegate after delegate spoke. Some urged caution. A few, very few, said nothing at all, watching Jisoo with something that might have been curiosity or might have been fear. Behind the political storm, the real work was happening in the cold silence of space. Aboard the Holosan, Captain Taeho sat in the tactical room, surrounded by holographic projections of the Eridu system. The data was not good. 14 Velkai warships held orbit around Eridu 7. Each one was roughly twice the size of a standard human destroyer. Their weapons were heavy, their armor was thick, and their crews were experienced killers who had spent generations conquering weaker species. The 7th Fleet had 9 combat ships, 9 against 14, and the 14 were bigger. Taeho ran simulation after simulation. In most of them, the fleet took catastrophic losses. In some, they lost entirely. He organized the results into a clean report and brought it to Admiral Yuna, who was standing alone in her quarters, staring out the viewport at the streaking lines of light-speed travel. The numbers, he said, placing the data pad on her desk. Yuna picked it up. She read every line, every projection, every casualty estimate. Then she set it down and looked at Taeho. What do the simulations say about the colonists if we don't go? Taeho was quiet for a moment. All dead. The Velkai don't keep human prisoners. They have no use for us. Then the simulations are irrelevant, Yuna said. We go. Taeho nodded. He had expected that answer. He had hoped for it. I have a plan. It's not safe, and it requires the Baekdu to do something stupid. Your specialty, Yuna said, and for the first time in days, there was the ghost of a smile on her face. It was built on speed, chaos, and the one advantage humans had that no simulation could measure. The willingness to do things that no sane species would consider. He proposed splitting the fleet into 3 attack groups. The first would engage the Velkai head-on, drawing their fire and attention. The second would loop around the planet and hit them from behind. And the third, just the Baekdu alone, would dive straight into the gap between the 2 largest Velkai capital ships and deploy electromagnetic pulse charges at point-blank range. It would cripple both ships instantly. It might also destroy the Baekdu. Yuna studied the plan. You're volunteering your own ship for the suicide run. It's not a suicide run, Tejo said. It's a very aggressive parking maneuver. Yuna stared at him for a long time. Then, she approved the plan. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hana was fighting her own battle in the electronic warfare suite. She had spent every waking hour since the crisis began, studying Velkai communications, their frequencies, their encryption, their command structure. What she found surprised her. The Velkai were powerful, yes, but they were also arrogant. Their communication channels were layered but not complex. They relied on their enemies being too afraid to fight, so they had never needed to worry about someone actively trying to break into their systems. Hana smiled. It was not a friendly smile. She built a jamming package, a digital weapon that would flood Velkai communication channels with noise, false commands, and ghost signals. If it worked, the Velkai ships would lose coordination within minutes. They would become 14 separate ships instead of one fleet. And 14 separate ships were much easier to kill. She brought the package to Yuna. The Admiral reviewed it and nodded. Good work, Lieutenant. Admiral, Hana said, hesitating. The colonists, the ones in the recording. There were children crying. Yuna met her eyes. I know. We're going to get them back? Every single one that's still alive. That's a promise. Back at Apex Citadel, the emergency session finally ended without resolution. The Council issued a formal statement urging all parties to seek peaceful dialogue. It meant nothing, and everyone knew it. As the delegates filed out, the Velkai Dominion sent one final transmission, this one directed at the approaching human fleet. It appeared on every screen in the council chamber at the same time. The Velkai commander stood on the bridge of his flagship, his dark scales gleaming, his teeth bared in what passed for a smile. We have detected your fleet, humans. We admire your courage. It will make excellent footage for our empire. Come and die. In the council chamber, delegates shook their heads. Some looked away. The Reshki delegate covered his face with his small hands. Aboard the Halasan, Admiral Yuna watched the message. She let it play to the end. Then she turned off the screen, turned to her crew, and spoke in a voice that carried no anger, no fear, and no doubt. All hands to battle stations. We arrive in 6 hours. The fleet flew on through the dark, and the stars did not blink. The 7th Fleet dropped out of light speed at the edge of the Eridu system, and for a moment, everything was still. The planet hung in the distance, a small brown-green world, with thin clouds and a single yellow sun. It looked peaceful. It was not. Admiral Yuna stood at the center of the Halasan's bridge, her eyes locked on the tactical display. 14 red markers surrounded Eridu 7 like a ring of teeth, the Velkai blockade. Each marker represented a warship larger than anything in the human fleet. Their weapons were hot, their shields were up, and they had been waiting. They've detected us, Lieutenant Hana reported from her console. Velkai flagship is hailing. Ignore it, Yuna said. She opened the fleet-wide channel instead. All ships, hold position. Formation dagger. Weapons charged. Shields maximum. Nobody fires until I give the word. The fleet settled into position, a tight, aggressive formation that pointed directly at the Velkai line like a spear aimed at a wall. It was not a defensive formation. The Velkai noticed. Then Yuna did something none of them expected. She opened a broadcast channel, wideband, unencrypted, visible to the Velkai fleet, the Galactic Council's monitoring systems, and every ship in the sector. This is Admiral Yuna of the United Earth Navy's 7th Fleet. I am addressing the Velkai forces occupying Eridu 7. You have attacked a civilian colony. You have taken our people hostage. You have killed innocents. Her voice was flat, steady, and carried the weight of a mountain. You have 1 standard hour to release every human colonist unharmed and withdraw from this system. At the end of that hour, we will no longer be communicating. There will be no second warning. There will be no negotiation. The clock starts now. She cut the channel. On the bridge of the Velkai flagship, the Velkai commander received the message. He was called Dominant Vorak, and he had conquered 11 worlds in his career. He had never lost a battle. He had never met a species that did not eventually kneel. He found the human message amusing. "They threaten us with 9 ships," he said to his officers, his rasping voice thick with contempt. "Show them what threats mean in our empire." The Velkai response came 12 minutes later, broadcast on the same wide channel so everyone could see. It was a live feed from the colony surface. 3 human colonists, 2 men and a woman, were dragged in front of the camera. They were bound, bruised, and terrified. A Velkai soldier stood behind them with a plasma blade. The colonists were executed one by one. The feed showed everything. The Velkai commander's voice played over the footage. 48 minutes remain, humans. Use them wisely. On the bridge of the Halasan, no one moved. No one breathed. Lieutenant Hana's hands were shaking over her console. A junior officer turned away from the screen, his face white. Captain Tejo stood rigid, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles had gone pale. Admiral Yuna watched the entire feed without looking away. Her expression did not change. Her breathing did not quicken. She simply watched, and when it was over, she stood in the silence for exactly 3 seconds. Then she spoke one word. "Enough." She turned to Tejo. "Execute the plan. All groups attack now." The fleet moved. It happened so fast that the Velkai barely had time to react. The first attack group, 5 ships led by the Halasan, surged forward in a direct charge at the center of the blockade. Their weapons fired in a coordinated storm, pouring energy into the Velkai line with everything they had. The Velkai flagship returned fire immediately, and the space between the 2 fleets turned white with weapons exchange. The second group, 3 ships, had already looped wide during the hour of waiting, using the planet's gravity well to mask their approach. They came screaming in from behind the Velkai formation, hitting the rear ships with torpedoes before the enemy even knew they were there. 2 Velkai warships took critical hits in the first 30 seconds, their shields buckling under the surprise assault. And then there was Tejo. The Baekdu was alone. It was smaller than every Velkai ship on the field. It had no business being in the middle of this battle. But Tejo had spent his entire career doing things that had no business working, and today was no different. He aimed the Baekdu straight at the narrow gap between the 2 largest Velkai capital ships, massive vessels that served as the fleet's command platforms. His crew knew the plan. They had volunteered to a man. The ship accelerated to maximum speed, dodging plasma fire, absorbing hits that shook the hull like an earthquake. "Steady," Tejo said, gripping his command chair as the ship shuddered around him. "Hold course." The Baekdu shot through the gap like a bullet through a closing door. At the exact moment it passed between the 2 capital ships, Tejo gave the order. "EMP charges. Fire." The electromagnetic pulse detonated at point-blank range. The blast was enormous, a wave of energy that fried every electronic system within 1,000 meters. Both Velkai capital ships went dark instantly. Their shields collapsed, their weapons died, their engines stuttered and failed. They became 2 enormous, drifting pieces of metal, blind and helpless. The Baekdu was caught in its own blast. Half its systems failed, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing the bridge in red light. Tejo was thrown from his chair, his shoulders slamming into the deck. He pulled himself up, tasting blood, and looked at the tactical screen through flickering static. Both capital ships were dead. The plan had worked. "Damage report," he coughed. "Engines at 40%. Weapons offline. Life support holding. We're alive, Captain." Tejo laughed. It hurt, Good enough. While the space battle raged above, the real mission was happening below. Drop pods slammed into Eridu 7's atmosphere like iron rain, each one carrying a squad of soldiers in full combat gear. Sergeant Doyen was in the first pod. He was a quiet man, short, wide-shouldered, with a scarred face and hands that were always steady. He had been a soldier for 20 years, and he had one rule: bring everyone home. The pod hit the ground, hard enough to crack rock. Doyen kicked the hatch open and led his squad out into the colony's main district. It was a mess. Buildings burned, streets torn apart by weapons fire, smoke everywhere. Velkai ground forces were dug in around the colony's central hub, where the hostages were being held. Doyen's team moved through the streets like ghosts, fast, silent, and precise. They hit the first Velkai checkpoint before the enemy even saw them coming. 3 soldiers down in 2 seconds. No noise, no warning. They pushed deeper, building by building, corner by corner. Doyen communicated with his squad in hand signals. They had trained for this 1,000 times. Urban rescue, close quarters, no mistakes allowed. Medic Yunji moved with them, her medical kit on her back, a sidearm in her hand. She was not tall, she was not intimidating, but she had a stubborn refusal to let anyone die on her watch that bordered on something supernatural. She had pulled soldiers from burning vehicles, treated wounds under enemy fire, and once carried a man twice her size across 2 kilometers of open ground. She was afraid. She was always afraid, but she never, ever stopped moving forward. They reached the central hub. The doors were sealed. Doyen placed breaching charges. His team stacked up on either side. On my mark, he whispered. 3, 2, 1. The doors blew inward. Doyen's squad poured through the gap. Inside, the Velkai guards barely had time to raise their weapons. The fight lasted 11 seconds. When it was over, every Velkai in the room was down, and the squad was standing over rows and rows of sealed cargo containers. Unji stepped forward and opened the first container. Inside, huddled together in the dark, were colony families, women holding children, old men clutching injured arms, teenagers with hollow eyes and tear-streaked faces. Unji knelt down. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something much deeper. She reached out to a little girl who was clutching a torn stuffed animal. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're from Earth. We're taking you home." The girl stared at her for a long moment. Then she reached out and grabbed Unji's hand with both of hers and did not let go. Above the planet, the battle was ending. 9 of 14 Velkai ships had been destroyed. The remaining 5, leaderless and panicking, without communications, thanks to Hana's jamming package, which had turned their channels into a chaos of ghost signals and false orders, broke formation and fled into deep space. The 7th Fleet held the field. 2 human destroyers were gone. 3 more were heavily damaged. Hundreds of sailors were dead. The cost was enormous. But on the surface, Doyen's team and 4 other squads had secured every hostage location in the colony. Every living colonist, 9,712 men, women, and children, was accounted for. Admiral Yuna stood on the bridge of the Halasan, reading the casualty reports. The numbers were painful. Good people, gone. Ships that would never fly again. Families that would receive the worst message imaginable. She read every name on the list, every single one. Then she closed the report and whispered to no one in particular, "Worth it." The battle footage reached the Galactic Council before the smoke had even cleared above Eridu 7. Every delegate, every advisor, every observer in the Apex Citadel watched it in complete silence. Some watched it twice. A few watched it 3 times, as if they could not believe what their eyes were showing them. It was not the victory that shocked them. Strong species won battles all the time. The galaxy had seen wars before, territorial disputes, resource conflicts, power struggles between empires. Fighting was nothing new. What shocked them was the why. Every species in the Council had, at some point in their history, faced a moment like this. A hostile power taking hostages, a stronger enemy making demands, and every single one of them had done the same thing. They calculated. They weighed the cost of resistance against the cost of compliance. They counted lives like currency, measured territory like trade goods, and made the rational decision. Sometimes that meant surrendering a colony. Sometimes it meant paying tribute. Sometimes it meant pretending that the people they had abandoned simply did not exist anymore. It was the way the galaxy worked. It had always been the way the galaxy worked. And then the humans came and broke it in a single night. They had thrown 9 ships against 14. They had sent soldiers dropping from the sky into a hostile colony crawling with enemy troops. They had lost 2 destroyers, hundreds of lives, and a captain who was pulled from his shattered bridge, barely breathing. And they had done it for a mining colony, on a planet that most Council species could not even find on a map. The chamber buzzed with quiet, troubled conversations. Delegates spoke in huddles, their voices low, their gestures uneasy. Nobody quite knew what to say. The Tolvari delegate, who had urged negotiation just days ago, sat in his seat, staring at his own hands. The Reshki delegate, the small fur-covered being who had lost his own colonies to raiders years before, sat alone, his eyes wet, saying nothing. High Arbiter Morvan requested a private audience with Delegate Jisoo. She agreed, and they met in one of the Citadel's smaller conference rooms, a quiet, windowless space with a round table and soft lighting. Sujin accompanied Jisoo, as always, sitting quietly in the corner with her datapad. Morvan settled his ancient body into a specially designed chair and regarded Jisoo with his compound eyes. He was old, very old, and he had seen more of the galaxy's history than any living being in the Council. But he had never seen anything like the past 3 days. "I must ask you something," he said, his clicking voice unusually subdued. "And I ask not as High Arbiter, but as someone who is trying to understand. Ask. Why?" The question hung in the air. "Your losses were significant," Morvan continued. 2 warships, hundreds of your people. Your captain Teho is in critical condition and may not survive his injuries. The colony you fought for has minimal strategic value, no rare resources, no military significance, no political importance. The rational choice by every measure we use was to negotiate, to minimize loss, to preserve what you could, and yet you did not. You sent your fleet into a battle you might have lost, and you paid a terrible price for a world that is worth almost nothing. Why?" Jisoo was quiet for a moment, not because she was searching for an answer, but because she was choosing how to deliver it. "You keep using the word rational," she said, "and I don't think it means what you think it means." She leaned forward slightly. "Those colonists are not numbers on a balance sheet. They are not units to be calculated. They are ours. Every single one of them. The miners, the engineers, the families, the children. They went to that world because Earth told them it was safe. They trusted us. And when someone put a knife to their throats, we did not sit in a chamber and discuss percentages. We went and got them." Morvan's antennae twitched. "But the cost..." "The cost is the cost," Jisoo said firmly. "We pay it. That's what it means to be responsible for your people. You don't get to abandon them when the price gets too high. The moment you start treating your own citizens as acceptable losses, you've already lost everything that matters." Morvan was silent for a long time. His compound eyes seemed to look inward, processing something that his centuries of diplomatic experience had never prepared him for. "I see," he said finally, though Jisoo was not sure he did. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the Battle of Eridu 7 spread across the galaxy like a wave. 3 smaller species, the Reshki, the Denmari, and the Hallan, quietly approached the human delegation at Apex Citadel. They did not come with demands or proposals. They came with questions. Careful, hesitant questions about something they called advisory partnerships. They wanted to know how humans train their soldiers, how they organize their fleets, how they built a military culture that would send warships to die for a backwater colony. Jisoo listened to each of them. She did not make promises. She simply said, "We can talk." Meanwhile, aboard the Halasan, now docked at a repair station, Lieutenant Hana was doing something that would change the political landscape of the galaxy. During the battle, her jamming systems had not only disrupted Velkai communications, they had also intercepted and recorded thousands of internal Velkai transmissions. She had spent days sorting through the data, and what she found made her stomach turn. The Velkai Dominion was not just a raiding force, it was a full-scale slave empire. The intercepted communications contained coordinates, population counts, and logistics reports for slave operations across dozens of star systems. And the slaves were not just unknown species from the Outer Rim. They were citizens of Council member species: Reshki, Denmari, Hallan, Tolvari. At least 6 recognized galactic species had populations that had been captured, enslaved, and put to work in Velkai mining operations and construction projects. The governments of those species knew. Some of them had known for years. They had done the rational thing. They had negotiated, paid ransoms, signed agreements, and quietly accepted that some of their people were gone forever. They had never told their own citizens. They had never told the council. Hana brought the data to Jisoo. Jisoo read it in silence, her face growing harder with every page. Then she looked at Hana and said, "Prepare a presentation for the full council. Every detail, every name, every number." The emergency session was called 2 days later. Jisoo stood at the central platform and presented the evidence. Intercepted Velkai communications, slave camp coordinates, population estimates, and most damning of all, records of diplomatic communications between the Velkai and several council species, proving that those governments had known about the slave operations and had chosen silence. The chamber was so quiet that you could hear the hum of the station's life support systems. Jisoo let the silence breathe. Then she spoke. "For decades, this council has called itself a beacon of cooperation and peace. And for decades, some of you have been paying the Velkai to keep quiet about the people they stole from you. You negotiated. You compromised. You made the rational choice." She paused. "And your people are still in chains." No one argued. No one could. Far from the politics, Captain Tejo lay in a medical bay on the repair station, his body broken in several places, machines keeping his vitals steady. He drifted in and out of consciousness, and when he was awake, he refused to talk about the battle. He only asked about his crew. One afternoon he received visitors, not human ones. Officers from 3 different alien fleets had traveled to the station specifically to see him. They stood awkwardly around his bed, these tall, strange beings from species that had spent decades looking down on humanity. And they asked him a question that none of them could answer for themselves. "How do you teach your soldiers to fight like that?" Tejo looked at them through swollen eyes. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, "We don't teach them to fight. We teach them what's worth fighting for." The alien officers looked at each other. They did not fully understand, but they wanted to. Back at the Citadel, a new transmission arrived. Not from the Galactic Council, not from any allied species, from the Velkai Dominion. This time it was not a demand. It was a threat. The Velkai High Command had mobilized their full fleet, every warship, every carrier, every assault cruiser in their empire. They were coming for human space. They were coming for Earth's colonies, and they promised to burn everything they touched. The message ended with a single line: "You should have negotiated." Admiral Yuna read the message in her quarters aboard the Halasan. The ship was still under repair. Her fleet was battered, under strength, and exhausted. But when she set down the data pad, her expression was not one of fear or worry. It was something harder, something colder, something that the Velkai had never seen in any of their conquered species. She opened a secure channel to Earth Command. "I need the 3rd and 12th fleets, full combat readiness, and I need them now." Then she opened a second channel to Lieutenant Hana. "Those slave camp coordinates you pulled from the Velkai transmissions, how accurate are they?" "Very accurate, Admiral. I can confirm at least 37 locations." Yuna nodded slowly. "Good, because we're not playing defense." She began drafting operational orders, not for a defensive stand, not for a retreat, for an invasion of Velkai space, not to conquer, not to claim territory, but to do something no species in the galaxy had ever thought to do. She was going to free every single slave the Velkai had ever taken. They called it Operation Homecoming, and it was the largest military action humanity had ever undertaken beyond its own borders. 3 full fleets, the 7th, the 3rd, and the 12th, jumped into Velkai space on the same day, at the same hour, hitting targets across a front that stretched over 40 light-years. Admiral Yuna commanded the operation from the rebuilt Halasan, her voice steady on the command channel, as dozens of ships moved into enemy territory like wolves entering a dark forest. But this was not an invasion, not in the way the galaxy understood the word. The human fleets did not target Velkai cities, they did not bomb Velkai infrastructure. They did not seize Velkai territory or demand tribute. They went straight for the slave camps. Hana's intelligence was precise. 37 confirmed locations, scattered across moons, asteroid stations, and barren worlds that the Velkai used as labor colonies. Each location held anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand slaves, beings from 6 different council species who had been taken, branded, and worked until they broke. The first camp fell within hours. A small Velkai garrison on the ice moon of Heren 3, guarding 2,000 Reshki slaves who had been mining rare minerals in tunnels carved deep into frozen rock. The human assault ships came in fast and hard, destroying the garrison's defense platforms before they could power up. Ground teams landed in the frozen wind and breached the compound walls. Sergeant Doyen led the entry team. He had not rested since Eridu 7. His body ached, his hands were scarred from the last operation, and he had not slept a full night in weeks. None of that mattered. He kicked through the inner doors of the mining compound and found what the Velkai had been hiding from the galaxy. The Reshki slaves were in terrible condition. They were thin, sick, and many of them could barely stand. They had been kept in cramped underground chambers with minimal food and no medical care. Some had been there for years. The youngest ones, children born in captivity, had never seen a sky. Doyen stood in the doorway and looked at them, and something in his chest tightened like a fist. He had seen bad things in his career. He had fought in ugly places and carried ugly memories. But this was different. This was not war. This was cruelty made into a system. Cruelty with spreadsheets and schedules and supply chains. He keyed his radio. Camp secured. Medics to my location. All of them. Now. Bunji was there within minutes, her team right behind her. She moved through the chambers quickly, triaging the worst cases, setting up IV lines, wrapping wounds, speaking softly in whatever phrases she had learned of the Reshki language. Most of it was wrong. Her pronunciation was terrible, but the Reshki understood the tone. They understood the hands that were gentle instead of rough. They understood the tears in her eyes. One elderly Reshki, his fur matted and his body bent from years of labor, grabbed Unji's arm as she treated a wound on his leg. He looked up at her with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, and asked a single question in broken common tongue. "Why you come?" Unji paused. She looked at him, this broken old being from a species she had never met before today, and she said the only thing she could think of, because nobody else did. The operations continued across Velkai space. Camp after camp was hit, liberated, and evacuated. Human soldiers carried alien children who could not walk. Human medics treated injuries they had never seen on species they had never studied, learning on the ground, making do with whatever they had. Human ships filled their cargo bays not with plunder or resources, but with refugees. Thousands upon thousands of freed slaves from half a dozen worlds. The Velkai fought back. They threw their fleet at the human lines, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to protect the empire that they had built on the backs of stolen people. Their commander, a new dominant named Sorek who had replaced the fallen Vorak, ordered the remaining slave populations moved to the front lines, used as living shields, just as they had done on Eridu 7. It was the same tactic, and it received the same response. Admiral Yuna broadcast on the wide channel, her voice reaching every Velkai ship, every slave camp, every council monitoring station. "This is Admiral Yuna. To the Velkai forces using civilian shields, you have 1 hour to release them and withdraw. You know what happens at the end of that hour. You have seen it before." For the first time in their history as conquerors, they hesitated. Because Yuna was right. They had seen it before. They had watched the footage from Eridu 7. They had watched their own capital ships go dark. They had watched the humans come through fire and death, and not stop, not slow, not blink. And they had finally understood something that no other species had ever taught them. Cruelty only works as a weapon when the other side is afraid of it. And humans were not afraid. They were furious. The Velkai fleet made its last stand at their home system, a heavily fortified cluster of worlds protected by orbital defense platforms and the last of their capital ships. It was the largest battle of the campaign, and it was brutal. Captain Tejo was there. He should not have been. His doctors had told him he needed 3 more months of recovery. His bones were still held together with surgical pins, and his left arm was in a support brace. But when the Bekdu, rebuilt and patched with new plating that did not quite match the old, shipped out with the 7th Fleet, Tejo was on the bridge. "You look terrible," Hana told him over a private channel. "You should see the other guy," Tejo replied. The battle was long and costly. Velkai defense platforms pounded the human fleets as they pushed through the outer perimeter. Ships took heavy damage. Crews fought fires and sealed breaches while still firing weapons. Tejo commanded the Bekdu from the vanguard, directing attack runs against the orbital platforms with the same reckless precision that had become his signature. A Velkai torpedo hit the Bekdu amidships. The explosion tore through 2 decks and killed 9 crew members instantly. Tejo was thrown against the bulkhead, and his barely healed ribs cracked again. His officers begged him to fall back. He stood at his console, breathing through the pain, and directed the final assault wave that broke through the Velkai defensive line. "Last wave away," he said through gritted teeth. Then his legs gave out, and his first officer caught him before he hit the deck. The Velkai Dominion did not fall to human weapons. It fell to something the Velkai had never considered possible: the collapse of their own power from within. As human forces liberated camp after camp, the freed slave populations began to rise. Species that had been broken and silent for years suddenly found their voices. They sabotaged Velkai supply lines. They disabled communication relays. They overpowered guards in camps that the human fleet had not yet reached, using tools and rocks and bare hands. The Velkai vassal states, smaller species that had submitted to the Dominion out of fear, saw what was happening and began to defect. One by one, they pulled their ships from the Velkai fleet, refused orders, and in some cases, turned their weapons on their former masters. The Velkai Empire did not fall because humans were stronger. It fell because humans showed the galaxy something it had forgotten: that tyrants are only powerful when everyone agrees to be afraid. And once that agreement breaks, there is nothing left to hold the empire together. 2 weeks after the final battle, Delegate Jisoo stood before the full Galactic Council at Apex Citadel. The chamber was silent. Every seat was filled. Every eye, lens, and sensor was focused on her. She did not gloat. She did not threaten. She did not list humanity's victories or demand recognition. She spoke quietly, and every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. We did not do this for power. We did not do this for territory. We did not do this for trade or influence or political advantage. We did it because it was right, and we would do it again, for any of you. She paused, letting those words settle into every corner of the chamber. That is not a promise. It is a warning. If anyone in this galaxy, any power, any empire, any force, takes innocent people and uses them as tools, as shields, as bargaining chips, we will come. Not to negotiate, not to debate. We will come. The chamber was still. No one spoke. No one moved. Then slowly, the Reshki delegate stood. His small body trembled, but his eyes were clear. He did not clap. He did not cheer. He simply stood. The Denmari delegate stood next. Then the Hallan. Then species that had never spoken to humans before, species that had watched from the edges of the galaxy, too small to fight, too afraid to hope. One by one, they rose from their seats, dozens of them, a silent wave of beings standing for something they could not quite name, but could finally feel. High Arbiter Morvan sat in his ancient chair and watched it happen. His compound eyes moved across the rising delegates, across the standing chamber, across Jisoo's quiet, steady face. And somewhere in his old body, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He could not tell if it was shame for the centuries of compromise, or hope for what the galaxy might become. Perhaps it was both. He stood too. Months later, on a quiet afternoon on Earth, Captain Tejo sat in a hospital garden overlooking the sea. His body was healing slowly. He walked with a cane now, and his doctors said he might always walk with one. He did not mind. He was alive. Most of his crew was alive, and the people they had gone to save were home. Lieutenant Hana came to visit him, as she did every week. She brought a datapad and a bag of tangerines, his favorite, and sat beside him on the bench. New communications coming in every day, she said, scrolling through her pad. 16 species have formally requested alliance partnerships with Earth. Not trade agreements, alliances. They want mutual defense pacts. They want to train with our forces. They want, she paused, looking for the right word, they want to learn how to be like us. Tejo peeled a tangerine and looked out at the ocean. The sun was low, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. They don't want to be like us, he said. They want to be brave enough to be themselves. There's a difference. Hana smiled. The Reshki ambassador sent you a personal message. She said her people will never forget what you did. Tejo nodded slowly. He thought about the ice moon, the children who had never seen a sky. Unji's hands, steady and gentle, pulling people back from the edge of nothing. Think they finally get it? He asked. Hana looked at him, then back at the datapad filled with messages from across the galaxy, from species that had spent centuries being afraid, and were now, for the first time, choosing not to be. No, she said, but they're starting to. Tejo smiled, ate his tangerine, and watched the sun go down over a world that had always believed, stubbornly, recklessly, and absolutely, that every single life was worth fighting for. And across the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000 years, the darkness felt a little less dark.